What's up everyone, we're back again for another Gundam Evolution patch notes overview, taking a look at our mid-season update, the Season 4 May balance adjustments. Unfortunately, we are not getting a new mobile suit with this mid-season patch, but we got quite a few balance changes, so without further ado, let's hop in and take a look at those changes. So first up, we have my boy Gundam, a suit that I feel has been in a little bit of a downward slump as of late, but thankfully they are throwing some buffs his way. First on the list, a 10 damage buff to the beam rifle, which since Gundam does have that 2x headshot multiplier, that will be translating to a 20 damage buff on the headshots. And they're also giving a 50 damage buff to the area damage of Hyper Hammer, which, if I'm understanding that correctly, I believe that's when you get the AoE hit from the hammer, so not a direct hit with the stun, just the side hit that has a little bit of knockback, so it'll make it a little bit better. If you don't get the full hit, you'll actually get a little bit more damage. And you know, overall I think this is good. I do feel like Gundam needs a buff. I felt like other suits were kind of surpassing him in the high damage role, especially with like Mara side kind of coming up and getting more and more damage on the main weapon. So he's kind of almost eclipsing Gundam in that role. He still did less damage on headshots, but his base damage shots were stronger. So I'm glad to see a buff, but you know, I've talked about this a lot before. This does feel like they're kind of buffing the things Gundam is already good at. Not so much the Hyper Hammer. I'm actually okay with that change because it does feel pretty unsatisfying when you get anything but a direct hit with Hyper Hammer. But I do feel like the main weapon has always been strong, so I kind of would have liked them to see, you know, maybe revert that shield HP nerf that was really heavy, or maybe do something with the G maneuver. But this is good. You know, doing some quick maths, you get 480 on headshots now, which times 2 puts you up to 960. With one body shot, 240 on top of that gets you to exactly that 1200 HP threshold, which is where a lot of, you know, suits sit at. Heavy arms, Guntank, you're gonna be able to take those guys out now. Theoretically, 3 shots if you get the double headshot and the body shot. And of course, more damage overall is gonna help when you got teammates doing damage here and there. You won't hit those exact. I don't think anything but 1200 HP really benefits from this if you're looking at exact damage thresholds, but you know, other damage sources will help. So glad to see a Gundam buff. Maybe would have liked to see something different than the main weapon buff, but it's gonna be nice. And you know, I still like to play Gundam a lot, so I'm definitely happy with this. Next up on the list is Gundam Barbatos, who, as many of you may know, is not a mobile suit I particularly like to play against or as. So thankfully for me, he's getting some nerfs this time. Quite a few nerfs. The first one lowering that HP from 1100 to 1000, which is a revert that actually a while back in the November patch they did increase that to 1100, so they're bringing that back down. Then they're also shaving 50 damage off both of the damaging abilities. So this is a pretty big change. Part of the reason they're talking about here is the fact that you could still one-shot people even after the change to longsword, where, you know, initially it was you had 700 in mace smash and then 800 on longsword on the full hit, which was enough to full kill anyone, because, you know, no one has 1500 HP unless you were buffed by Unicorn. So then we thought, you know, and they probably thought too, if they're lowering that down, now it's only 1100, so we've got those higher health suits can still survive. But the thing is, Barb can pretty quickly get out a standard melee attack, which is 300 damage afterwards, so you were still hitting that 1400 damage threshold, which means even Sazabi, the tankiest suit in the game, was still dying from basically one combo, unless you had, you know, like extra unicorn armor. So they're lowering that down. Now it's only going to hit 1300 combined together, which does mean Sazabi will live even with the extra melee, and this is also going to lower it so some other suits will survive the 2-hit combo, and you'll need that melee follow-up to finish them off. So overall, I'm happy about this because I hate playing against Barb, and I do think the HP buff they did before was a mistake. I think 1000 HP is already quite a bit for someone who's so hard to, you know, keep locked down and actually get a kill on. So I'm glad to see that change, but lowering the ability damage might be too much all at once. I really think just the HP thing might have been okay on its own. So doing all of that is maybe a bit too far, especially when we get down to some of the later changes where some suits that Barb is a strong counter to also got buffs. So those together, it might push us too much into a bit of a shield meta. You know, Barb will still be strong. He can still insta-kill, you know, a lot of suits, but I think they may have gone overkill here, which may lead to the rise of a lot of Barb's usual counters becoming a bit too strong. Up next, we have Methuss, who was actually just talking about my latest video, getting a couple buffs here, getting 2 more shots in the main weapon magazine, and also getting additional 50 damage on Twin Shot, which Twin Shot currently does 400 damage. You get 150 on each of the explosions, plus 50 on the projectile itself. So now this will bump you up to 500 if you get the full hit, which is a pretty big chunk of damage. That's really good. They did say they're doing these changes because they noticed Unicorn Gundam had really surpassed Methuss, which honestly I feel like was kind of already the case in general play, at least, even before they made those Unicorn buffs, but maybe meta's different with JP and competitive and stuff like that. So these are nice changes. They're making Methuss stronger on the offensive front, still leaving the healing where it's at, which I know will disappoint some people, but you know, I'm happy to see Methuss get some changes. I do think this will make him a bit more fun. Still not the crazy healer, but yeah, I think that's kind of okay. This game does generally have lower healing in general, so making Methuss a bit more of a better fighter in addition to his support capabilities is a pretty good change in my opinion. Next we have Dom Trooper, who's getting what I would probably say is a small change, just a buff to the sensor mines, getting the maximum damage, the minimum damage, and the cooldown all buffed. They say here that they felt that the mines were having a very little impact, so they wanted to buff them, but personally that strikes me as a little weird because I think the mines are supposed to be overall low impact. They're, you know, they already were a short cooldown ability, something you can often place and forget. And yeah, they had other utility and ability canceling, so I feel like it's a little weird to like kind of use that logic to buff them. But I guess if you want to give Dom a small buff, mines are probably the thing to target. But I am a little bit worried this might not be as small as it seems, because if you're looking at this maximum damage, 3 mines is going to hit you for 600, which is a lot of damage. So, you know, a lot of times mines are easy to avoid. You're usually not getting hit by a full clump, but if you get hit by that full stack for that 600 damage, that's going to be wild now. It's really going to catch people off guard. So we'll have to see. I think for a lot of Doms, this isn't going to change much, but for those Doms that are really good at finding places to put them, really good at using them in the middle of combat, you know, in between their rocket shots, throwing them out at close range, this could be very strong. Although it also is worth mentioning, I don't know if it probably doesn't change anything with friendly fire damage. So for the Doms that do like to use it up close for extra damage, they're going to be hurting themselves potentially more as well. So that might backfire a little bit. But overall, a little bit of a weird change. I don't know how I feel about this one, but it probably won't be too big a deal. Moving on, we now have a change for Guntank. They're giving a buff to the main weapon. They're increasing the fire rate in the multi-lock mode, so the not aim down the sights mode where you're targeting multiple at once. They're making it fire faster, and then for the concentrated aim down the sights mode, they're buffing the damage by 2 for each shot. So these seem small, but you know, like we know with the heavy arms buff from last patch, those small numbers on these fast firing weapons can end up being pretty impactful. And you know, we talked about already before, Barb got a nerf to that HP. I felt like Guntank, while not good at taking out a Barb on their own, is really good at helping getting that Barb weaker because it's hard to miss with Guntank. So softening him up for the rest of your teammates to take down is usually a good option. So now Guntank is better at softening up Barbs, and Barb has less HP. So that's another swing not in Barb's favor. So this could be pretty strong. I think some people are underrating this. I felt like Guntank is in a kind of an interesting spot where in 1v1 scenarios, he loses a lot of the time, but he's also just a really good addition to teams for that consistent damage and that general kind of bulkiness. Personally, I was kind of expecting they were going to, when Guntank did get a buff, it was going to be to either something with the G maneuver or an HP increase to 1300. So buffing the main fire is a little bit of a surprise to me. I think this is worrisome a little bit. I like playing Guntank, so I'm glad to see it kind of buff, but I'm a little concerned about this. We'll have to keep an eye on this one to see if Guntank becomes a bit too strong. Up next, we have Mahiroo getting another buff, so shortly after the big rework. I think a lot of people felt that while the rework was nice and definitely pushed Mahiroo in a good direction, it still was a pretty weak suit overall, so it is nice to see him getting another buff. I actually am kind of surprised considering, you know, last time Mahiroo got any buff whatsoever, or not last time, but the time before last time, when they got that big buff, they almost immediately undid it, so it's nice to see that they are keeping with giving Mahiroo buffs when needed. So we're just getting maximum damage increase and minimum damage increase on the main weapon. So I don't know the exact damage thresholds here, but I think I heard that with now with 3 grenades hit plus the flip kick, you can kill 1000 HP suits, I believe, without having to, you know, reload and fire additional grenades, which is pretty strong. You know, that is one of the main things Mahiroo's always struggled with, is that you can't really win 1v1s without really prolonging them out and getting a lot more nades on people. So this is a good change. I think it's a good idea to kind of slowly buff Mahiroo, especially after they quickly undid everything last time when they did a big buff. So slowly buffing them up and seeing how it goes is a good approach, I feel. So like these changes, hopefully Mahiroo will be in a better spot after this. And now for a buff I know a lot of people have been waiting for. We have Zaku Melee, who a lot of people have considered to be the weakest suit in the game right now. I think I was on that page as well. So getting some nice buffs here is good. Starting off, we're getting the guard tackle when you're holding your arm up to block in front of you. We're getting that goes from a damage reduction of 30% to now 50%. And then they're also reducing the cooldown of the big overhead swing large heat hawk shockwave from 8 seconds to 6 seconds. So these are some interesting changes. No direct damage buffs or anything, but guard tackle, holding up your arm and blocking, a lot of people use the tackle for damage, but I don't think a lot of Zaku Melee players really use that to actually block damage. I know I personally almost never used it in that way, so it's nice to see if they're buffing that there. I do believe that's one of your, if you get shot at, that is one of your better ways to build rage. And Zaku Melee before buff in their current state, that is kind of their situation where it's really hard for them to build rage. And if they never do, they're weak, but once they get that rage, they're pretty scary. So this could potentially help with that a lot. It allows you to feel more of that tanky role to help build up your rage. And then also that's kind of the same thing that's going on with the other buff by lowering the cooldown on the Heat Hawk Shockwave, because that's also one of your best ways to build rage when you're not able to get in close to people. This means you can spam more often. I think this is probably okay. Large Heat Hawk is a scary ability because it's got like a huge hitbox, it does pretty good damage, and it goes far. But I understand these types of changes, why they're going for this. They're really trying to give you better options to build rage, because that's where Zaku Melee is, the only place where Zaku Melee is strong right now. So I think this is kind of cool that they're working on making Zaku Melee more of like a tanky bruiser, which is kind of what he's been, but now they're kind of committing to it more. So I think it's pretty interesting, but these shockwaves getting spam more are going to be kind of scary. So glad to see them make these changes. I actually think these are some pretty good ones to start with, so we'll see how this goes. Zaku Melee might be coming back in the meta with these types of buffs. And now for the scariest of changes, we have a lot of buffs for Hyperion Gundam. First, getting HP going from 900 to 1000, also getting a cooldown reduction from 14 to 12 on that bubble shield, and also being easier to build up to that G maneuver. So they're saying they did this because they felt like Hyperion Gundam was struggling in close range combat, which, I mean, I kind of feel like that's where he should struggle, since that's where a lot of the melees are, but maybe they mean just in general in close range combat he's losing. And also that his win rate was kind of lower. And obviously I don't have access to the win rate numbers, but that does surprise me, because they felt like he was too strong at launch. They gave him that, they took away 8 bullets from the total magazine. Then after that, they gave a buff to Forfanterie, lowered the cooldown by 2 seconds. And those changes together, I feel like mostly equalizes it, maybe still a little bit weaker than launch. And now they're going absolutely crazy by giving 100 more HP, making the bubble shield have a lower cooldown, and the faster G maneuvers, which, if you ask me, with these changes, even with the losing 8 bolts in the magazine, this to me sounds like a much stronger Hyperion than we had when it was first released. And when he was first released, he was considered too strong. So this seems like too much to me, especially with, the nerf to Barb. I don't think the buff to Melee Zaku is going to be enough to offset this. Even if he is better, I still think this is crazy to make Hyperion this strong. So definitely disagree with these changes. I feel like Hyperion is one of the suits that can be the most difficult to fight if the Hyperion is a really good player. So I really didn't think he needed any buffs. So the fact that they're giving him all of these is terrifying to me. And this is part of why I can't be too happy about the Barb nerfs, because Barb was one of the best counters to Hyperion. And now the 2-hit combo, if Hyperion has any sort of extra health from Unicorn or like a Dom thing, he will survive that. So even then, Barb might not be a good counter anymore, or as good a counter anymore. So, and Barb pick rate may go down with these changes. So I'm worried. I don't like these changes. I'm scared to see how this will play out. And then for our final unit change, we are getting a buff to the newest suit, Gundam Dynames. They say its win rate has been very low, so they're making some changes to the G maneuver. The projectile size is tripling when you're in Trans Am, and it's taking less time to get up to full charge. So I don't entirely know how I feel about this. You know, I think since Dynames has come out, I've only run into a couple that are actually really all that scary. And those that were scary, I've recognized a couple of them as people who used to play, or still do play, but weren't playing at the time, GM Sniper a lot. And I honestly felt like I was more scared for pretty much all of them going against their GM Sniper than their Dynames because of how scary those one-shot headshots are. So I do kind of agree with the idea of buffing them, and I do think the G maneuver is kind of hard to use, so buffing it to that, probably not a bad change. So but at the same time, you know, a lot of people have still been saying that Dynames is the better of between the two snipers, even if that's not necessarily what I've experienced so far. So we'll see. I don't think this is gonna make him too crazy because it's just limited to the G maneuver, but maybe those really crazy sniper players might have an easier time shredding your team when they do have that Trans Am active. So we'll see how that goes. I think this is a safe change. Don't really know if it was needed, but I don't think it's too bad. And following up from the unit changes, we also have some map changes. We are getting a change on Lunar Comm Station. They're saying that that pathway from that A point over to B point was too narrow, so they're making it wider. I think this is an okay change. I don't know. I mean, you don't actually end up fighting in that hallway too much, I feel like, generally, but there are a lot of players who, no matter which point is active, they like to go through A to get there. So maybe this will be a little bit better since that won't be as much of a death hallway to go through, since it's a little bit wider. You can actually dodge stuff. It won't get spammed with nades as much. So I think this is a fine change. I don't think it's gonna feel like anything sort of crazy, but I guess it also gives you a little bit more room to fight off of A. When you're fighting around A, you can back into this hallway and you're not going to get completely zoned out by napalm as much, although napalm's pretty wide, so I don't actually know if that'll matter too much, but in general it gives you a bit more space to work with. So good change. I don't think it's going to be anything too super noticeable, but I do like it. And then they don't have it here, I think, but they did mention on Twitter they are also decreasing the rate of appearance for buried cities. So I think they did that already one time, but it was still really frequent to see that map. So they're lowering it again. So hopefully that'll make it more in line with other maps, and it won't feel like it's showing up almost half the time like it did before. And then for our final changes, I believe these are only for ranked matches. They are changing their rate for individual performance. So they did make a change a little while back where like the best player in the lobby, even if you lost, they would lose fewer points, and if you won, they would get more points. And I don't know if it necessarily just did best and worst or if it did a whole range, but it looks like they're increasing these. So now the higher performing players will rank up more quickly and rank down slower. So overall a good change, but you know, a lot of us still can't play ranked outside of the JP region, so it might not impact a whole lot of people overall, but I think it's probably a cool change either way. Yeah, that's going to be it for all of the changes from this mid-season patch. As always, I'm interested in hearing your guys' thoughts, how you feel about all these changes. Overall, I like the fact that they buffed a lot of these suits. I'm very worried about Hyperion, and even though I want to be happy about the Barb nerf, that makes me more worried about Hyperion. So we'll see how it plays out. I'm hoping that people will play better against Hyperion now he's been out for a while, so maybe it won't be too bad, but I wouldn't be surprised if they have to revert some of that. So, but either way, you know, let me know your thoughts. I'm curious to hear what you think. And let me know what you're looking forward to most with the upcoming patch. Either way, that's going to be it for me. Thanks again, everyone, for watching, and I'll see you next time.